how easy can you make it to develop the project without screwing it up? And so that's kind of where we've landed on this. And we have a very simple, simple rule that we use. We only develop successful projects, or at least that's the goal. Easy, right? It's no problem. There's a couple of key elements behind that. One is what I call client selection, and that means being a little picky about the projects you take. When we first started out, we had a very specific date in the future when the 3 or 4 of us that started the company would run out of money and have to go get other jobs. And so any client that walked through the door, they said, you know, wax my car. If they're going to pay the billable hours fee, I'll wax that car, no problem. But as we developed focus and developed more projects under our belt, you know, so you do a few good projects, word gets around, now you have to hire another guy because you're doing more projects, and so you do a few more projects, now you have to hire another guy, and so you build the company out. What we started to realize is that sometimes you know from the start, this isn't going to be a very good project to work on because the client is asking for something crazy. And we've started to realize that you know, you don't have to say yes to that. And that actually works better than you expect. I'll give you an example. We had a client, we did a big content strategy and IA project for a few months ago. They're a mid-sized university. And we got to the end of it and said, okay, here's your big complex IA, here's your site map. When do you want to get started development? And they said, well, that all looks great, but we want to introduce sort of a new wrinkle. We have somebody that knows WordPress, and so we like to do this all in WordPress. We said, yeah, this is pretty complex for WordPress. We don't know if we want to do that. And they said, well, we really want WordPress. So we went out and found some other company that would do WordPress. And we said, look, we don't think this is going to be a successful project with WordPress. You guys are set on it, that's fine. Here's some guys that will help you out, and we wish you the best of luck. And what that made them do is say, wait a minute, these guys that we trusted to do all this IA and strategy for us now are saying, well, we won't do it because of this idea that we had. So they in turn said, well, tell us a little more about why this isn't a good idea. And ultimately we wound up being able to use a more robust system to do the project. So sometimes you lose projects this way, but you don't do a bad project. So it's sort of the opposite of, you know, the old adage of every shot, you miss every shot you don't take. Well, you also don't miss every shot you don't take. So sometimes that's okay. A big part of what we do is plan well and fail early, and by that we use sort of an agile process, or Scrum, or Kanban, a lot of words for it, but iterative development, and I'll talk a little more about that in a second. And the second is the last item there is we keep the client in the loop, and we are very transparent about what's going on with the project. I've had some very uncomfortable conversations I probably could have avoided, but that builds respect and rapport with the client relationship down the road. So as a consultancy, agile methodology seems a little off. How many use some sort of agile approach? A few, okay. Basically, agile came out of product development environment. So I have a big company, and I've hired 5 engineers to work on this thing all year. What am I going to have them do? So the assumption is I'm going to have them do something, and they're going to be here forever, so let's make sure they're doing the most efficient thing all the time. So it's a product development approach. Consulting says, tell me how much you're going to charge me and when it's going to be done, and then I want to stop paying you if you're a consultant. So these are somewhat at odds, but you can still use an agile iterative process, and I'll talk a little bit about how we do that. So there's a lot of discussion about agile processes online, but when I talk to other companies roughly our size, and by the show of the hands here in the room, it seems like it's the same here, there aren't a lot of people actually using agile methodology. And I think, at least on the consulting side, and I think that's because we're supposed to bill hours in order to make money. And if we're working on our internal processes or deciding how we're going to do our paperwork, then we're not billing hours and making money. But the thing is, it pays off in the long run, because in a consulting environment, if you have a better estimate, you're going to be able to retain more of your billable hours. if you have a problem, the guy with the best documentation in an adverse relationship with a client is going to win. So having some of these pieces in place and having an effective process does pay off. So in our case, this big project started in about mid to early 2010. So I literally have a child that's going to preschool now that is younger than this project. So I can't estimate that all at once, nor would I try to. So what we did is we broke it down into phases. And by that, each phase was sort of another major project within the larger project. And we tried to break it down into several months. We worked these things as individual projects, so we launched them at the end of the project. Whether or not a user got on it or not was up to the client, but in terms of our development, each phase was launched. And we kept an eye towards just not screwing ourselves for future phases. So we had a big Gantt chart. This isn't it, but this is an example of a good old-fashioned Microsoft project Gantt chart that showed these dependencies. And within each of these projects, we wrote up a scope and did a work breakdown structure, which is essentially taking that big project and breaking it down into a series of tasks. This is a great place for developers to screw themselves because we all have what's called developer optimism around our office, which means if I can think of how to solve a problem, it's basically already solved. It doesn't take many hours because I just wrote it in my head. But you don't count the time that you hit that bug you don't expect, that you need to deploy and test and get approval from the client and incorporate their changes. So this is key, and we don't ever do one for more than about 30 hours. If it's more than that, we break it down into smaller tasks. So we get a pretty good idea of what's going to happen in a project before it starts. From there we go into sprints or milestones, depending on your particular form of Agile, what you'd like to call it. And around our team we do bi-weekly deliverables, which means every other week we're taking a list like this and demoing some feature to the client that's developed and actually handing it over to them so they can get their hands on it and really prove and test it. And that means that we're under constant pressure throughout the project to keep things moving. And the client all the time is seeing progress. And so there's a lot of back and forth. They're involved. And the real key thing here is that if I'm working a 12-week project and on week 2, I say, you know what, we've missed some milestones. We think this thing's going to go a little long and we're not going to meet that deadline at week 12. There's a lot of discussion and back and forth. And I can say, well, they can say we can move the deadline. They might say, well, let's leave some features out. But if I do that at week 11 and I say, oh, you know what, we're not going to make everything next week. Well, now we have a shitstorm because there's nothing anybody can do at that point. So failing early is really key to this. The main way we do that is instrumentation. We use Redmine, which is an issue tracker. Jira is a similar system. And really, all of our development is tracked just like we track our support issues. So the fact that the contact form needs to be developed, the issue there is there's no contact form. And you can close that ticket when there's a contact form. So we treat that the same way that we treat anything else. We also use a burn down chart, which is a key Agile method that basically for each of those estimated times, I want a chart of how we're progressing against our time estimate week over week. So the blue line here is our estimated time, and the red line is our spent time. So pretty early on in the project, I can kind of get a gauge of what's the slope of this graph. And am I going to reach my estimated hours at the end of the project, or am I going to go over or under? And how am I, as long as I stay under that blue line, I'm under budget and everybody's really happy. And the key way to do this is my most hated thing in the world, tracking time. We've tried a lot of time tracking systems. Ultimately, the easiest way we found to do it is to have a system that pulls time out of iCal and into our tickets. So we just drag time out in Google Calendar or Apple iCal or whatever you use for developing your calendar. So client involvement is really key in all of this to keep things moving. And it really does become a partnership. The more engaged the client is, the better the project goes. And We were lucky on this particular project that we had a very engaged client. They have a very good project manager, and they help control their own scope. They help QA. They're really interested in their output because this site is a core part of their organization now. So that's been a big help. They handle testing and feedback. We have a single point of contact there, which I think is crucial. If we have a client where they say, we don't have a project manager, we don't have a single point of contact, we actually add time to the project because we're going to have to do that job for them. And the client logs into the issue tracker as well, which is real key because they're seeing all the same stuff that we're seeing at the time we see it. And if they find a bug, have a problem, they can enter it right away and sort of dialogue with the developer. None of that happens through email, which is huge. Okay, so there's your vegetables. So now let's talk about some fun stuff. One of the big things we had on the site was scale. So nobody really knew how many articles there were because no one had been keeping count for 140 years. So the challenge was, how do we divide things up? Because we had estimates that said it's going to be between 3/4 million and 1.5 million, maybe 2 million content objects, and that is a little more than you want to fit in a single easy publish install. So the first way we looked at it was dividing it by time scale, and this is supported somewhat by EasyFind through the archive method. Philip, Peter, and Doug have done a very good job of this on the monitor site by basically taking old content, and dividing it up into time periods. So they have, you guys holler if I say anything stupid here. They have content in the sort of live recent news system, and then it falls back to an archive as it gets older. That didn't really work for us because there's really no dividing selection. That works for news because current news is far more interesting than old news. But the problem we have is that some of our oldest stuff is some of the most interesting stuff. So rather than dividing along timelines, we divide it along periodicals. So we have right now 3 different instances, one for the Sentinel, one for the Journal, and a central hub instance that serves as a landing page called JS Economy. That's soon to be joined by a 4th instance as we bring on the multilingual content.